how this panel is going to work is we're going to talk about some topics. I've got some good questions that a lot of you have helped me come up with. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A shortly in about 40 minutes. So when we do that, just raise your hand. If you think of a question in the meantime, feel free to write it down on your phone so you don't forget it, because we want to get to as many questions as possible for this very important topic. So thank you both for joining us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Welcome. So first I'd like to start with Jess. Can you tell us what the Zero Carbon Challenge is?
Of course. Kia ora, my name is Jess. The Zero Carbon Challenge came out of a partnership with Pledge Me, the Inspiral Network, which some of you might have vague ties to. There's quite a few nomads floating around Inspiral. And the Wellington City Council about 5 years ago. I wasn't involved then, but it started as basically a crowdfunding accelerator. So we took fledgling eco-friendly businesses, basically, and businesses in the startup phases locally, put them through a 6-week accelerator of marketing and storytelling and business planning and finance and legal structures, all leading up to a crowdfunding campaign that they ran locally. So they got to raise some money from their crowds. And then the cool thing about the program that I think is a little different from a lot of accelerators is the council put up a matched fund so that if a company was successful in its crowdfunding, they were eligible for additional funding from the match fund. So we saw companies raise up to about $60K, which for a local fledgling startup that's working for free, is pretty significant cash. So it's 4 years old now, or 4 cohorts old. It's actually about 5.5 years old as a program. And so we've seen 6 or so businesses about every 18 months go through this program. And it's really cool to see the ideas that are coming out, but then also to see the way the local community gets behind it. Because you get kind of receipts for, is this idea valid? Because you get people actually pledging to it. So it's a cool way to launch a product or a service. We've had everything from electric car share to locally grown yeast for brewing, a lot of sustainable food initiatives and delivery things and looking at reducing waste. And so it's kind of a cool way to see what's actually happening on the ground for local businesses. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, very good. And Wokje, would you please explain to us what environmental psychology is? Because I just found that such a cool title.
So hi, my name is Wokje. I teach at Victoria University and I'm an environmental psychologist, which broadly looks at people and the environment, so my research focuses on people's perceptions and attitudes and behaviors. So I look at things like beliefs about climate change, what motivates people to take action on climate change, because there's a lot of kind of assumptions about human behavior. As long as we have the right technologies, as long as we have the right policies, things will kind of be, that's how we tackle the climate challenge. So my work focuses more on kind of untangling or kind of unpacking those assumptions a little bit, because people are not always rational decision makers, and sometimes not all policies are acceptable to people, and so it's looking at kind of how better understanding people's motivations and kind of acceptability of policies, for example, to kind of help inform how we can better address environmental issues such as climate change.
Yeah, amazing. So backstage just now, Jess said something about how we need to overcome this feeling that this is so big we can't do anything. Mm-hmm. So Wokje, how do you see people starting conversations to kind of get past that first wall, which is kind of a paralysis of I can't possibly make a difference, and so we kind of have that tendency to shut down?
That's a really great question. I'm not sure if I can kind of answer it to your to kind of your satisfaction. There's different views on this as well. So I guess my take on it is that, and there's different viewpoints on this, but that there's also a lot of smaller things people can do. So often there's kind of what you could call catalyst behaviors, I think it's called in policy sometimes, is if people start, for example, to recycle, they might start to see themselves as an environmentally conscious person and they might start to do something else. It often can start with a small thing that you can do, which can then lead to other changes as well. And there's also, I think, the role of other people. I think you really see that just generally with the School Strike for Climate, which started with one Swedish high school student who sat there with the sign, School Strike for Climate, and this has become a global movement. And so I think, and partly this was to do with social media and people kind of sharing the story. So I think sometimes you can shut down because it seems too big, and the problem is really big. But I think as individuals, we can make difference, a difference, and it can be in a small way, but it can also lead to bigger changes if that
Yeah,
makes
a
sense.
snowball effect.
Yes.
And it's about identity, like how we
Yes.
identify.
Yes.
Interesting, yeah. So we, a few of us were here during one of the big school strikes, and we went to the protest, we marched, and that brought up a lot of topics around like, okay, what is our role as visitors in terms of how we engage? Like, this is a global problem, but when we're protesting outside of the parliament here in New Zealand that we do not have a vote in, like, how would you, Jess, as someone who moved here from elsewhere and then got involved, how would you say, like, how long do you have to be somewhere before you can get involved in like activism in that way?
I think it depends a lot on, where you are and who you are, and so there's obviously probably some legal restrictions, and if they're good laws, then I'd say, recognize them and look out for them. But I think the thing that's really important is getting involved in a place is looking at what's already there and what's happening. I think it's really easy to think that you're kind of the first person who's had an idea or that you see a solution just by looking at it. So one of the lessons that I've learned a lot here from working around just any kind of space really is like Indigenous people in New Zealand have been caring for the planet for literally thousands of years and are better at it than colonizers have been. And so I think kind of looking to what's already happening in a place and augmenting that work where you can. I came out of international development originally and kind of thought I would end up becoming a globetrotter, and then I accidentally came to New Zealand and didn't leave. But
It's a risk.
But I think looking at making sure that you're always working with people rather than, at them, or, doing things with the community rather than for them. And so I think looking at what's happening on the ground and figuring out how you can add to it rather than feeling like you have to reinvent it. So I think, everyone here is obviously relatively digitally savvy and you have plenty of marketable skills. And so taking those to existing movements and being like, can we contribute? This is what I can do. Is this useful to you? Or, I admire what you're doing. How do I do this respectfully? And kind of think about how you can add to existing movements and participate in them rather than feeling like you have to go on your own or start it. That's kind of the easier thing about arriving as a visitor is somebody already organized the march, so all you had to do was show up. And you can do the same kind of thing with anything. There's wherever you live or work, there's someone locally who is protecting the local nature preserve or advocating for changes within their government. And even if you can't vote, voting is like just a very smallest bit of political engagement. And so there are still ways that you can help both where you live as well as wherever you have ties to. Like that's the cool thing, I guess, about the digital life. And the downside to climate change is that it doesn't really respect boundaries either or borders. And so there's no reason that you have to feel like, well, I live here, so I can only act here. So yeah, just kind of contribute to existing work and for the love of God, like pay attention to what Indigenous people are doing is the lesson there.
Yeah, because a lot of us like do have home bases or are looking to get home bases, but we also have ties to like certain spaces that we go back to again and again. So it would be relatively easy to maybe form some relationships and start supporting in whatever capacity we have, like social media or app development or whatever skills you have.
You can give money, like you can donate money to things. NGOs are poor, they're always working on a tiny budget, and if you're not sure or you don't have the time necessarily, like giving them some cash.
Yeah, a friend of mine is fond of saying that there are two ways you can show up in the world, with your time and with your money is much more scalable.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
Like we talked about burnout this morning, so we do need to be careful about how we spend our time, but money, we can give that.
Yeah, I think we were starting to chat about this a little bit backstage, but thinking about the idea that like everything you do is political, and so every dollar you spend is political, and you can use all of this as a statement, and that is, I think, a good way to start thinking about activism without necessarily having to mean protesting or getting arrested or marching on the streets, but just deciding where you spend your money, whether that's, do you buy clothes from ethical producers, do you offset travel things, do you buy from underrepresented groups or companies owned by them in your community. And I think that's a good place to start with kind of small actions that have ripple effects, because up until we dismantle capitalism, which is not outside the realm of possibilities, but until then, your dollars are a political act. And I think just remembering that is a good way to think about, like, all of those acts can matter, and you can start small. I feel like I'm chatting a lot. So. Over to the psychologist.
Yeah, you've also done a lot of talks about how we need to, how we can make simple actions, like everyday actions, by voting with dollars and supporting businesses that align with the values that we have. So how do we like go about like, how do you say as a psychologist we go about motivating a pro-environmental populace?
Right. You do ask easy questions.
I try.
Yeah, so I mean, it all depends on the kinds of behavior you're looking at. I think different actions are related to different motivations.
Mhm.
So if you're looking at consumption or consumerism or where you spend your dollars, that will be largely determined by money. And I think also if you have a higher income, you have the ability to spend it on kind of, because often the kind of ethical and kind of environmentally sustainable products are also more expensive, like think organic
Yes.
and those sorts of things. So having said that, people on higher incomes also have a higher impact, myself included, I guess, as an academic. Where was I going with this? So I guess it depends on what kind of behavior you're looking at. If it's like you're looking at transport, it's a whole different issue altogether, because transport or travel choice is very much habitual, so that there it is about kind of trying to disrupt habits or changing people's behavior in terms of giving them different options. It all depends on the kind of behavior you're looking at. So people often ask me, well, what works best? Like, what's the best way to change behavior? And I always say something that I always say, it depends, and that's not what people want to hear. There is no one single solution, and I also think that, I mean, like individual behavior is important, but it is kind of in tandem with policy responses as well. So if we want to, so for example, the New Zealand government has proposed a zero carbon bill, which is currently going through various processes. And I think one of the scenarios I think that an economic institute calculated was that to get to zero carbon, we would need to electrify the vehicle fleet by like 95% of the vehicle fleet needs to be electric. I think currently it's less than 1% or something along those lines. So, and you can say, well, we just need to subsidize electric vehicles, but then you also have issues around access, a lot of I think a lot of us in New Zealand live in cities, but not everybody, so there's issues around that. So how do you get to that point? Like incentives and policies need to be part of it, but also kind of do people actually want to drive electric vehicles and those sorts of things.
Maybe we want to ride the bus.
Well, yes.
But no, I think that's interesting in thinking about. I think one of the reasons that it feels sort of just impossible to act in the face of insurmountable problems is knowing that in the grand scheme of things, our individual actions aren't actually all that much compared to, we talked about plastic straws come up a lot, and then something, I think it's read recently that like the Saudi Arabia oil company is responsible for like 5% of global emissions.
Which is like more than double.
Which is like more than like half countries,
yeah,
like entire bodies of like countries of people. And so it's one of those like, how much do we really matter? And I think, and I have to think this because otherwise it's too depressing, that a whole bunch of individual actions become policy changes. And so a whole bunch of people deciding I'm willing to pay the premium for organic, or I'm not going to pay the cheaper price for exploitative labor practices or whatever, starts to lead towards those policy changes. And the same thing with electric vehicles. I mean, we could electrify the whole fleet, or we could drive less, and just get rid of half the fleet. And I think kind of being open to the ways that you can act, and it does depend. We hear the same thing in crowdfunding. People are like, what's the best social media platform? It depends. Where are people? Where do the people you interact with spend time? And I think the thing that I find hopeful about all of that is that everyone's collection of little actions that you're able to take can start to matter, rather than focusing on, oh God, there's so many things wrong. The silver lining is there's so many things we could be doing. And that sounds, I think, almost naive, but hopefully maybe it's a place to start where if you can fixate on this one little act is making the world less terrible, and that wasn't so bad, I can try another one, and hopefully 50 more, and tell a friend.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that is the plastic bag ban or charge that was introduced here. I think it was earlier this year.
Yeah, you'll notice you've never seen a plastic bag in Wellington.
So when I moved here 6 years ago, so I'm Dutch, and so I grew up with bringing basically your own bags to the because you always have to pay for plastic bags in the Netherlands. So anyway, so I would be at the New World or Countdown supermarket and bring my own bag, and they would be really confused about what to do, and I would just pack my own stuff in the bag, and so But now, and I was just amazed at how many that people would have these shopping trolleys with 10 different plastic bags, and some things were double bagged, and there was so much plastic. I just couldn't believe it. And so now you don't see that anymore. Now you see everybody with the reusable bags, and you see them laying around in cars. And so it has shifted, and it's one policy that has really turned things around in a good way, which hopefully then, as I alluded to earlier, perhaps then people start to think more about other things to do with waste, like the plastic packaging around the food products, for example, that they buy. So there's one policy change can then have a flow-on effect on other things as well.
I think the thing that's really interesting here in New Zealand is we're seeing now the groundswell of people who are kind of petitioning supermarkets to pack things in less plastic. We've seen a couple of young startup companies in New Zealand that are basically doing reusable coffee cups that you can return to any of the participating cafes. So if you forget your Keep Cup, you can take away your coffee in a Keep Cup and give it back to a different cafe. And there's a group in Wellington looking at doing the same thing for like takeaway noodle bowls and stuff. And a lot of that's coming out of the, 6 years ago, I think we were all talking about, it's so hard to remember your plastic bags. And now we're like, oh, maybe we could remember our Keep Cup too. And like, there are some really hopeful kind of bits of progress we've made. And I think that's the thing that I try to remember about this is you never really know until after the fact which action is going to be the straw that broke the camel's back or is going to be the crest of the wave. So like Greta Thunberg didn't know that she was going to start a global movement. She was like, this is important to me, so I'm going to do it. And she's probably still bewildered a year and a half later to wake up and find that she's a global celebrity. But I think you never really know, and so that's why you might as well try. Because like maybe that's the action that wakes up a whole bunch of people or gets them on board with you. And if it's not, the worst thing that happened is that like you helped make the world a little bit better. And so either way, there's a silver lining.
Yeah, definitely. It's about like meeting people like where they are and having like breaking it down from this big insurmountable problem into like smaller actions that can be much more tangible. Like Wokje, I know you have talked a bit about how we need to think about areas where there are dual benefits. Like if instead of driving, you ride your bike to around, and then you also get health benefits. So you can kind of sell people on new activities, like new habits via dual benefits, not just environmental friendliness.
Yeah, that's absolutely. So they're called co-benefits in some literature. So it's around that the changes you make in your lifestyle or in your kind of daily life have multiple benefits. So often, as a Dutch person, of course, I go on and on about cycling. Although I have to now admit that I don't really cycle here anymore because of A, the wind, B, the hills, and C, the combination of the two, and also. And this will hopefully stay between me, you, and the gatepost. Kiwi drivers are not necessarily attuned to cyclists. So anyway, but I walk and I use public transport. Anyway,
you're not wrong.
So if you start walking more or start cycling more, that also has health benefits. And I think more broadly speaking, I think any sort of climate action also, because climate change is an environmental problem, but it's also a social problem, right? So there's a lot of kind of issues around, like, you talked about capitalism, whereby the economic system is all about growing indefinitely, and this has enormous impacts on the environment, but also on inequality and on working conditions and so on. And so things like buying kind of ethical products or fair trade products can have an environmental impact, but can also have a social impact. Eating less meat, for example, has a clear climate impact, but also has health benefits and animal welfare benefits. So there's all sorts of co-benefits that come with changing a behavior or changing a climate-related action. Yes.
Yeah, because that can be good. Like I know a lot of us, we might want to do something, but also it helps when we do things as a group, or maybe if you can help people back home or have a buddy, like you're more likely to act how your peers act. So getting, and sometimes a lot of people don't want to talk about, well, I don't want to change that habit, but if you can pitch it in another way, it can be more helpful. You can get more people on board.
Yeah, in terms of like the meat thing, I am not quite a vegetarian yet, working on it. But the thought of like switching to full veganism just like seemed overwhelming to me, and like that's so much, like I just don't know how to do that and be healthy or feed myself. So we started with like meatless Mondays with a couple friends, and you do that thing like let's learn to cook, or let's like, let's do this together. Let's go learn how to make tofu palatable. And you actually can. I found so many delicious things you can do with tofu. But it was about having a friend who could either laugh with me if we ruined it or be like, that was really great. Let's do that again. Let's brainstorm more ways. Also, because cooking for one is often more work than it feels like it's worth. But yeah, I think having that sort of social support network is really important, and I'm sure the psychology backs that up, is that like we are more likely to act if we think other people are watching, and that's why I think it's important to set good examples, but it's also important to kind of like help other people along on that.
Yeah, so there's definitely research from psychology around kind of social influence. So we are more likely to do a behavior. This could be an environmental behavior, but also something else. When we see other people do it, or when we think it's endorsed by other people. And so yeah, so you can sort of see that with the increase in kind of plant-based, or people who eat plant-based diets. I'm a terrible vegan. I try really hard, but it's a transition. But I'm actually really inspired by my students. I think in some of my cohorts, there's so many students who have now, are vegan or eat plant-based, and I thought, I sort of feel that, that's something that I can do as well. Although I'm actually, maybe I should not admit this, but I'm really terrible at changing my own behavior, which is probably why I do research. I have for years. I'm trying to become a morning person, and I've just not quite managed it.
I feel like there's science that backs up that like you actually can't always learn that though.
Okay, that's a relief.
But I think that, being a morning person or like completely giving up all animal products is kind of like maybe the end goal, but I feel like the small steps are still worth it. And you can also just start with the areas of your life that are easier. Like, I don't like to drive. I grew up in Orlando, Florida, so I grew up in like suburban hellscapes where you had to drive to get anywhere. When I came here, I was like, nope, I'm gonna pass on that. And I live in the city, and so it's very easy for me to take public transport because it cost my partner and I like $3,000 to store his car last year, and so I made him sell it because we didn't drive it $3,000 worth of time. And so now it's very easy for me to be on my high horse about public transport because I don't have a car, or it's very easy for me to remember my reusable bags because I walk past my apartment around town, and I try not to be a dick about it, but those are easier changes to make because those are available to me, whereas like friends who live out in the suburbs still have to drive, but like they have a yard, so they've gone hard out for growing vegetables. And I think kind of starting where you can, starting with the things that are easy and relatively not disruptive to your life kind of paves the way, and that you get that snowball effect of like, okay, I can learn this next thing, and now I can venture into another one, and maybe one day we'll be morning people who never eat cheese.
I'm not holding
Maybe.
No one's holding their breath for that. But yeah, I think you hit like, don't be a dick is such a good golden rule for life, but also especially around this topic, because I've definitely heard people say, well, I'm not having kids, so that's my contribution.
Yeah, I mean that's one of mine too, but I never wanted kids, and I just got the environmental spin later.
Right. It's like that's not actually a sacrifice. And it's fun, like we all are, we have certain things, but getting up on your high horse, it can feel really nice.
It
but
does. The view is
it's
great,
probably not conducive to encouraging, your wider social circle to like join you on a journey of being more responsible, because you maybe weren't that responsible. It was something you were doing already. I think about.
But the smugness feels good. Just keep it to yourself. Like, if you've ever attempted to grow food somewhere, I live in an apartment, so I do have like a couple of little lemon trees in a pot, and like the first one that grew to full-size lemon, and it's actually to date still the only one, but it was the best tasting gin and tonic I've ever had. Yes, I grew this.
I love that that's what you used it for.
Well, it was one lemon. It wasn't going to go into lemonade. There wasn't any other options for it. But those little things, like they can feel really good and satisfying, and you can kind of like keep your plant alive. It turns out it feels really good. And so then I was like, well, maybe I'll plant ones that bees like, so that they'll come hang out on my balcony. And then I remember that bees actually kind of terrify me, so now I'm like sitting there like, I'm so glad you're here. Please don't hurt me. Just stay in the plant. But just try something.
Well, and this morning, Danielle from Zealandia did challenge us to maybe even try, when we're in a place for long enough, to get a little plant and encourage native wildlife. So who knows, maybe we'll start a whole nomadic plant growing movement, although someone will have to teach me how not to kill plants.
So one easy way is to like plant native plants. Like, don't go in for fancy house plants that are like far from their homes, but planting stuff that's actually meant to live there. And in places like New Zealand, where introduced plants are kind of wreaking havoc on the environment. Like it's actually one of those double benefits of it's easier to keep it alive and it will like continue to give to the world. So that's one of those cool, or if you really honestly can't keep a plant alive, then like go plant trees somewhere. Find a group that's doing that, and plant it in a place where someone who's good at caring for it will look after it for you.
Yes, we all have friends who are probably good at that. Because our community is not only nomadic, we have, we all have friends and family who we can maybe make an impact in that way. I know I've been trying to tell my mother about how, grass is a completely useless plant and we should have, a nice local garden. I'm still working on that. It's been like 2 years, but someday I'll get her to plant some native plants.
I have a father who's a golfer, so.
Oh, no. So Jess, have you noticed, because with the Zero Carbon Challenge, like that is such a cool idea, an accelerator that's focused on environmental companies. Have you noticed that elsewhere? Do you know of other places that are doing that?
I don't know specifically around like the accelerator thing, but I feel like the trend is picking up in that, social enterprise was kind of a weird, slightly buzzwordy phrase, and now they're kind of the notion of having something alongside profit that's either as important or more important is much less weird. And I feel like, even, when having to remember your reusable bags was a huge ordeal for everyone, and now 6 years later, everyone remembers. It's starting to change, and I think we're increasingly getting to a point where the ethical or sustainable option is no longer really a value add, but is becoming the norm. And I think even if you're not always spending your money that way, it seems that yes, we are all thinking about that a bit more. And I think we're kind of crossing over into where now having ethics is like the smart business move, which is really cynical, but I think it's now becoming I think about this in the same way that the same-sex marriage debate in the States kind of happened, and how we talked a lot about like the corporate pink washing and rainbow washing of all of a sudden all these companies were like putting gay couples in ads and they're like, we're so progressive, and how quickly we went from like mocking them for their kind of lazy advocacy to like how shockingly groundbreaking it was to even do that a few years earlier. And I think it's kind of the same thing with, making ethical clothing was wild years ago, and now it's kind of weird if you're not at least like being transparent about how you're trying to get better. And so I think we're moving towards that where it's no longer like a special class of business, and it's now becoming, we're seeing existing companies trying to prove that they're doing better or that they're trying to do better. And I think that's interesting, and I think that's where like the power of individual consumers is really interesting, is that we can start to push for that either by just buying stuff that is pretending to be or is hopefully actually ethical, and advocating for that and saying like, this is what I want to spend my money on. I want to know that my clothes were not made by children, or if they were, that they got a fair wage. Let's not use child labor though. But I think, but like we're now aware of that, and that's no longer just like something that weird hippies think about, but that's something that everyone is at least somewhat conscious of. And so I think it's starting to change. And I think a lot of that is, it starts with a lot of very local businesses, because it's easier to do that stuff on a local scale. It's easier to produce locally if you only sell locally, because then you don't even have to get into the mess of customs and postage and shipping and all of that. And so I think it does start with small things. So it's happening wherever you live or are currently based. There are really cool businesses locally doing stuff with upcycling materials or training people who don't normally have access to jobs, or making interesting stuff in ways that is less impactful. And so I think it's there, and it's always been there. I think this is just one of those where like the government starts to notice, and it's like, oh, how do we put some money into that? Can we get on board? And yeah, I think it's encouraging that it's continuing to happen.
Yeah, for sure. Because I know, like for us at the conference, like this year, it was super easy for, the tote bags that you all got. They're environmentally friendly. They were made here in New Zealand. All our signage is printed. Huh?
Who made them?
Kiri, who made them?
I was just curious what company it was, sorry.
I do not remember the name. And they, like, all the signage was printed on recycled paper, and all our catering was very happy to make sure that everything was, compostable or recyclable. But as we've moved, like, this is definitely the easiest place it's been to get started. It's slower in other places. But I know, for instance, we could definitely, vote with our money more. Like I know there's a new cafe in Phuket, Thailand, where a lot of people like to spend time. That's all environmentally friendly, but it's a lot, fewer and far between outside. Like New Zealand is definitely a leader in that space, for sure. And how Yeah. I mean, like, because you both lived here for a while, but as you're both expats, so like, how have you noticed, like, when you talk to people back home, any differences in like the mindset?
I guess so. So things have changed in New Zealand with the new Labour-led government. It wasn't like this. I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago when National was in power. I think you can really see a shift in how people, how the media talks about climate change, how people kind of, it's much more kind of a conversation topic. Although of course I'm biased because I work in the field, so I talk to people who talk about climate change. But you can really see a change, and I have to say I've lived overseas for 12 years, so I'm a bit out of touch with what's going on in the Netherlands, but I know in the Netherlands there's a conservative government, and I'm not entirely sure about their action on climate change at the moment. I think people are too preoccupied with Brexit and other things going on. So I think, yeah, things have definitely shifted, since, I mean, I don't know if you've been here longer than
6 years, I think, actually probably around the same time I got here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely shifted since the Labour government, which was actually, I think, 2 years ago. So it's even, and I think the reason I've always kind of theorized that New Zealand is not better, but kind of more visible at these things is this is a tiny country. There are 4 million some odd people here, which is a medium-sized city in a lot of other countries. And I think the thing that's interesting in New Zealand is that what would be a small pilot program in the United States or, you know, this Russia or China or anywhere is national level here. And so I think that has allowed New Zealand to just kind of like roll stuff out and try stuff in a way that's more difficult in other places. Because I mean, it is a large country in terms, well, actually not, it's relatively tiny, but it's quite stretched out and dispersed. But there really aren't that many people here. There's, 350,000 people in Greater Wellington, and Greater Wellington goes like way up the coast. And it's just like, there aren't that many people. And so it's easier to start doing that kind of stuff. And then everyone also knows everyone. So a lot of those social relationships probably come into play because you can't do something like move to a new city and start over without knowing a half dozen people who are gonna find you. And like, will have known you from a past life, or used to live next door to you, or dated your cousin for 10 years or something. Like, you don't have any of that here. And so I feel like to some extent the smallness of New Zealand kind of makes it easier to just to try it, and also just like tiny scope. Like New Zealand was really early to like online banking and like chip cards and stuff because you could roll out national systems at the bottom of the world, and stuff that went terribly, no one would know and no one would ever hear about it. And it's a fantastic place to live for that very reason. But so I think New Zealand has kind of always, the joke in New Zealand is that like everyone always points to like punching above our weight, or like wants to measure everything in per capita terms, because New Zealand is great at everything per capita, except most of the Pacific Islands, I think, now defeat us in like Olympic medals, because when there's 50,000 people in the country and you win one, you're nailing the per capita stats.
But New Zealand, it does definitely like punch above its weight. But interesting, something you said there, like how when you move around, it's hard to, not know someone, not already have connections. And I feel like in a way, our community is like that globally. Like sometimes I joke that if I wanted to go somewhere and like not see someone I knew, I'd have to go like really, really far, somewhere that like way remote, because we all move so much. Like I've seen many of you in the last 12 months since the last conference, just because we happen to be in the same place. And I feel like knowing the connections that we already have, like using the networks that we already have, there's Stephanie Aerosmith, who is a speaker in Year One, who many of you know. She'll also be doing an expert session in the 7 and 7 Society next week. She is currently, she's a nomad. She's worked with some startups. She's Indonesian, and now she's working in Singapore. But what she's doing is connecting like North American and European venture capital funding to projects in Asia that are focusing on ocean plastics. And it's not that she had a background really in environmentalism or finance, but she had connections. So that's how she made use of that, and that's how she's making an impact. Now that is her full-time job, and obviously most of us don't have that kind of time, but using like what we already have, the global network we already have, to maybe connect ideas and people that otherwise wouldn't be without. Like I'm trying to spin, is digital nomading actually a benefit to this whole being an environmentalist?
I mean, I think like it depends. Everything depends. But I think, the relationship thing is a big part of why New Zealand, I think, is good at trying stuff and is often seen as more progressive. and sometimes gets credit when we don't deserve it, but I think is good at trying. Oh crap, I just had a point and that's gone away now. What were we just talking about?
Connections.
Oh yeah, connections. So for all of the crowdfunding, all of the Zero Carbon Challenge projects, the reason they did well is, relationships. People can either support them with actual cash by buying their product or supporting their cause, but they also had the sort of connections that are like, hey, I have a friend who's good at making video. Do you need help with design? Connecting somebody who does deliveries to the electric car share company here so they can kind of partner up that way. There was an alumni of the program a couple years ago does the bike cargo messengers around town, and now almost every local business in Wellington uses them for deliveries because, shocking despite the hills, these people can pedal like cargo bikes up hills, and they'll just deliver, your packages or your baking or whatever tasty catering you've ordered and stuff. And that's the thing that I think has made the Zero Carbon Challenge and a lot of New Zealand really special, is that there's the perception amongst all those eco-friendly businesses that, the rising tide lifts all boats. Climate change pun not actually intended there, but that we all benefit when businesses are trying harder, when they're working together, rather than having to feel like you're constantly in competition. They are able to support one another. So we saw the campaigns like donating their own products to each other's campaigns, and like helping one another, which is kind of not what you're supposed to do in business, but seems to very much be the Kiwi way, because you know everyone and you can't be a dick for very long because it's going to bite you. And I guess that's what's exciting. I think with the Nomad thing as well, you have those same networks, they're just a bit more distributed, but the cool thing about digital ones is that you can introduce rich venture capital friends to cool projects on the ground wherever you're living. And the other interesting thing is that I think part of the reason people like to work in New Zealand is the New Zealand dollar is a bit shit, and so your American dollars go further. And ditto for working in other places where the currency's not as strong, is like your chunk of American dollars or euros can go so much further in other places. And I think that's where, like, being open to making those connections is one of those really easy things that you can kind of uniquely do as a nomad, is think about your networks as being much more distributed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I love the way that this conversation has gone, in that we are not talking about like digital nomading as, completely antithetical to being a good person in terms of like your environmental impact. But I do think like that has definitely come up, I think, for a lot of us, like where people might say like there's the whole flight shame movement in Northern Europe and things like that. Like, how would you as a psychologist say, like, if someone comes at you with like, oh, well, you shouldn't be doing that, and they try to shame you, how do you kind of turn that around and start a productive conversation as opposed to one, because I think there's some science backing up that like when people make decisions out of shame, they don't last.
Yes, you're right. It comes down to kind of, because shame, and also I think the associated one is guilt, right? That you feel guilty for. As an academic, I also fly quite a bit and feel quite guilty about it, and it's it's sort of a real conflict whereby I sort of feel it's in part of my job is to go to international conferences and present my work, but at the same time, there's the carbon footprint that basically I can be vegan all I want, but I think one flight to Europe is kind of puts an end to that. So I think it's a real conflict, right? Also for not just for digital nomads, but I think for other professions as well, like academics and others. So how do you overcome shame? I think it's about, there's some research around kind of the framing of kind of climate messaging and around that kind of negative kind of fear appeals and making people feel guilty is not necessarily going to work, and it can actually in the longer term have the opposite effect, right? That people start to kind of completely disconnect from that. So I think, I don't have the answer to how do you overcome it, but I do think more positive and a more positive approach is probably the way to go, especially in the long term, and around, if people do something that's rewarded in some way, or there's, I think, some research that showed that when people are sort of publicly praised for doing an environmentally friendly thing, that actually has a bigger impact than giving people money for doing an environmentally friendly thing, because giving people money completely backfires. People sort of do the opposite of what the intention is, because it undermines people's motivations, right? So often, a lot of people are motivated to do something for the environment, and if you then pay them to do something, it's kind of undermines that motivation. So yeah, a positive approach, which sounds maybe a bit sort of, but it's I think a lot of even in terms of how climate change is sort of communicated in campaigns is basically the doom and gloom scenario, right? As like a very negative approach, and I think it probably could be beneficial to turn it around and think about, okay, what can we do, and what are the good things that are happening, and yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I read this really interesting article in The Guardian last night about, it's called "Why Do People Hate Vegans So Much?" or something along those lines. But there's also something around, you talked about kind of, it's sort of, there's a lot of emotion involved in these behaviors. I mean, and we talked a little bit about kind of your identity. So it's not often about, oh, do I buy an electric vehicle, or do I go vegan, or do I do X, Y, Z? But there's also, it's sort of, other people perceive you in that way, right? So I remember this was several years ago when I was at, I think it was Christchurch Airport, which shows you my carbon footprint. And I was asking about the vegetarian option, and the guy behind the counter said, "Oh, you're one of those." So there's a whole kind of, so even being an environmentally friendly, like doing something environmentally friendly, can kind of have all these kind of responses from people. So it's not just about the behavior, but it's about kind of the things that are associated with it, like, and could be shame or ridicule or guilt. And so it's all about overcoming that, and again, maybe it comes back to seeing what other people are doing. So if you see a lot of people driving electric vehicles, or I don't know, do other things for the environment, like use less plastic or whatever, you see the benefits, and so that can help shift it around. I mean, I'm kind of rambling on a little bit, which my students know all about. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think a lot of the messaging around climate change is very kind of negative and uses fear or guilt or shame to kind of get us to change behavior, which I'm not sure will work in the long term.
Yeah.
I think a lot of, when you talk about shame and guilt on like individual levels and dealing with it, like therapists will always tell you should talk about it, which feels like the worst possible reaction. Like, why do I want to dwell on this more? But I think if we talk about that more, we start to kind of interrogate, why are we uncomfortable? How can we address that? And maybe some of that is, are we offsetting, the most problematic parts of our lifestyle with some other actions that we can take? Because, you can do, I'm sure many of us watched The Good Place at some point, and so if you haven't, I'm going to spoil an overarching thing for you. But basically the fundamental point comes down to, like, the world is so complicated today that literally everything we do is problematic. So, you chose this one organic tomato, but it used all this water, and someone lost their house, and, everything is deeply, deeply complicated. And I think the way we start to kind of move past that is to talk about it and to examine it and to interrogate it and just get more comfortable facing that and realizing, yes, flying a lot is difficult, but if no one talks about what's happening to the climate and how we change our behavior, like, that's also bad. And just starting to have those conversations and being comfortable with, yes, I don't know how to make my life better, but I want to, and that's a good enough place. And like having this kind of thing, go talk at your break about what can we do, where can we start, what's stopping you from doing something, and if it's that fear, shame, and guilt, like, the way you conquer that, I think eventually, is just talk about it so much that you're like, yep, I am problematic. That's okay. I'm working on it. We can all work on it together. And yeah, just defeat it with rambling.
No, absolutely. And that was exactly the point of this panel, is to start kind of, because I know a lot of us, when we've been having these conversations, there's a lot of fear and shame and guilt wrapped up in them, and I don't think that's productive. So I hope what we've done here is to kind of open the door for more honest conversations, more vulnerable conversations. So now it's time to open it up for questions from everyone out there. So if you have a question, all right, we'll start right here with Dan. Oh, we'll start with Steph, or Daniel, then Steph, and then back.
Hi, thank you so much for organizing this panel, and I think particularly your question, Kit, is probably the elephant in the room here. I just looked it up, how much a long distance flight actually burns in terms of kerosene. It's a lot. So as you said, you might be vegan as you want. One flight is essentially killing all the positive impact you're having. So I think one question is how to deal with what you can do to offset it, how you can deal with the guilt and the argument. But of course, there's also the very fundamental question, is it a good thing to do? So I'm professor of information systems, so I'm very much interested in the economic and the technological aspects, but cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin burn the energy of Denmark to maintain the network.
Right. Yeah.
And the digital nomadism involves a lot of flying, which involves burning a lot of kerosene, essentially for the reason that you want to be somewhere else too, because I find it more interesting to be here with you than being at home in Sydney. Now, you see where I'm going with that question. So the question is it something that we can solve in terms of argument, or is it something that is inherently a conflict between sustainable practices and other things that we value in life? Can that be resolved in any way?
That's a good one.
I mean, the point you raise is excellent. It's so a lot of the and I kind of talk about my own example as it's a conflict between my work related travel and my personal kind of beliefs around flying, and it's also it also comes down to relative impact. I mean, I saw this piece I think a while ago where I think the UK Department of Transport calculated that 1% of English residents were responsible for a fifth of all air travel, and so it's also about who has the highest impact here. And I don't know about your collective carbon footprint or anything, but I it's also about who is flying a lot and who where does the responsibility lie. And I think it's a tricky one. Air travel is a big one, but I think going car free for a year has more impact than flying less. I can't remember there's all sorts of lists about the top 10 things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint. So partly it's about who has the biggest impact and therefore contributes the most. And yeah, so it's a difficult this kind of conflict to kind of.
I think you're kind of always trading something off. You're trading off the excitement of new places versus a bookshelf and roots and seeing your family regularly maybe. Or maybe that's not a downside. But I think it's about kind of thinking interrogating what is it about the nomad lifestyle that you really like, and trying to find maybe other ways that you can get those needs met that maybe don't involve as many flights, for instance. If you reach the conclusion that I like this, but the flights are hard. You can be a nomad on a sailboat. It's super fun. That was my brief foray into nomadism, was a month in the South Pacific. And it's beautiful and delightful and much less impactful. You can, fly less and spend more time in new places or something like that. So there are ways to start to play with that and to trade off all of the things. And I think keeping in mind that bigger picture of yes, flights are the biggest impact on your life. Where do flights sit in the greater picture? Can you be using these flights to advocate for other changes? And get tangled up in the complexity of it all. The Bitcoin one is really interesting, and the cryptocurrency. I had a friend who gave a talk about the environmental impacts of the internet, and about 2 minutes of the talk was about the environmental impact of Bitcoin, and she had 3 weeks of cryptocurrency enthusiasts on the internet just screaming at her for daring to insult cryptocurrency. And she was like, there's actually a lot more than that. It is very impactful.
Yeah.
And that's one of the areas that I think we're still, all as a global collective, really struggling to understand, is that we think, I've worked on a team that organized a virtual political conference rather than flying everyone somewhere, but we don't actually really know what running most of the world on AWS servers cost in terms of carbon, and where our internet happens and what where the cloud is actually stored can make huge differences. So that's one of those other areas that I think, as people who tend to work around digital and technical spaces where you do have the capacity for more impact, is thinking about how is the energy that powers our computers working? What are those massive companies doing? If you're contracting for tech companies, what kind of influence do you have to influence that? So I think that's important to think about. It's almost like invisible power use. It's really easy to think about flights as massive, and we think about, we Skyped instead of going to meet each other, but if we're Skyping via servers that are burning lots of coal, was that better? No one knows, because no one can measure it yet.
Yeah, there's a book called How Bad Are Bananas? And it is, sorry, were you going to say that?
No, I was going to be are they really bad?
And it's the carbon footprint of everything. It actually breaks down things. But yeah, that's an excellent point, because, so I know for me, By the end of this year, by the end of 2019, I will have flown around the entire world twice. It's a lot. Yeah, I went ahead and I did a few, like, the calculators to figure out how much it would cost me in carbon offsets to offset it. It was like $400.
Which is like, I mean,
It's a very
that's
small
an international
percentage.
flight off of New Zealand.
Like,
That's a single flight for
Yeah,
us.
it's like, I was like, oh, I can do that. But then, yes, how much is my, like, massive, completely ungone through digital library of all the photos I've taken in the last 10 years of nomading? That's taking up a lot of space on Dropbox and Google Drive and iCloud and all those things. So, yeah. All right, I will see. We're going to get Steph and then Paul and then Jennifer and then, okay, and we're going to have to cut it off because we do have other things to do. But yeah, as quick as you guys can with the questions.
I'll be quick. So
Yeah.
I'm admittedly a bit pessimistic about being able to change people's habits. I think it's really important and really altruistic, but I am a little bit pessimistic about our potential to actually do that on a global or impactful scale. One of the things I'm less pessimistic about is science, and I've always believed in science, you know, us fundamentally being able to change like our course or impact in different areas. So I'd love to hear more about, you know, the relationship between economics and science, because I'm a firm believer that if we can make being environmentally friendly cheaper, that changes everything. We don't need to change people's habits. That will change automatically because the economics make sense. So I'd love to hear more about if you guys know of any projects that are really like focused on scientific efforts there to change the economics of whether it's energy or anything environmentally related, waste removal, and then also how we can potentially invest in that, because that's something that I'd love to do more of, but I don't know necessarily like where my money can go.
That's a really interesting one. I know on like the most kind of the smallest scale, like the practical example of that is things like congestion charges, which is more about putting the actual cost of environmentally less attractive choices, like actually making them cost what they really do. And so rather than subsidizing roads and cars so that they feel cheap, is charge them what they're worth. And those are working in cities that are doing it. You're seeing people drive less because suddenly driving isn't cheap. So I think, and the same thing with like cities that have very, very cheap public transport, people don't mind as much if the bus is late, but if the transport is expensive and irregular, then you just don't bother to use it. But as soon as it's cheap or free, you're like, well, I don't mind a mild inconvenience because this cost me $1. So I think there's that level with that, like putting the true cost of stuff on our behaviors, and I think that's one of those economic, or you know, we aren't actually rational, but sometimes we like to pretend we are. And I think putting the true cost is the purest example. There's an interesting international global Slack family that's called Climate Tech. There's like 1,000 some odd people in it, but it's basically a bunch of tech workers around the world who are interested in climate change issues. And I've seen a few things pop through there, so if you guys are interested, to look up Climate Tech Slack, and I'm sure the join page will turn up. But there's a bunch of people in there kind of thinking about those issues and doing some of that research. So that's the first example I can think of. Actual academic. Do you have any other ones?
Yeah, no, those are examples that I would have talked about as well. I think one of the things around so you're basically saying that, you know, we need to kind of make the price of carbon visible, and, you know, the real cost of carbon needs to be included in the price. One of the drawbacks of, say, a congestion charge or carbon taxing is that it generally affects households on lower incomes disproportionately. So I think while I see a role for economic incentives and taxation, there is also that drawback of kind of it will impact different groups differently. And I do, like, around the role of science and technology and kind of economics, I think the way that the academic world works generally is that people kind of do their research in one area and they don't necessarily talk to each other. And so, and I'm not an economist, although I know economists and they have a different view of the world than I do. And I think there is been, I think in the climate change domain, there has been very much a focus on the science, and we need to just tell people about climate change, and that will then, you know, then they will support action on climate change or support policies. But that has not necessarily been the case, and in fact there's been a concerted effort to discredit the science of climate change. So there's this whole kind of, again, it's also about how do people respond to kind of scientific evidence, how do people respond to economic policies to change behavior, how do people respond to technological innovations. I mean, there's a bit of research around For example, that people who own electric vehicles tend to drive them for longer periods of time, and people who have installed energy efficient lighting will have it. It's called the rebound effect in economics, whereby an initial efficiency is basically counteracted by increased behavior. So people will leave the lights on for longer, or which is if it's renewable energy, then it's probably not as problematic as when it's coal-fired electricity. But so that it's called the rebound effect in economics. So people, or for example, you save money on your electricity bill and then you spend it on a domestic flight. And so I absolutely take a point around the importance of economic policies and technological innovations, but I do think that the human dimension is an important part to consider as well, because people don't always act in line with what economists would predict or what technology people would assume, kind of even just an efficient appliance will just mean that people will use it efficiently, and that's not necessarily the case. So this is sort of a very biased plug for the importance of looking at individual behavior, but I do take your point that, technology and economic policies are really, really important, but I do think that some of these other issues need to be considered as well.
Absolutely.
I think it kind of goes to what we talked about, where it depends, and some people will respond really well to just pure science. Some people respond really well to pure economics. Some people need that emotive thing to kind of make you care. Some people need the individual story that makes it become real. Whereas it was just an abstract intellectual thing that happened to other people until you knew it. And so I think all of those things have a place, and it's really about figuring out where can you be most useful, which one's effective for you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Paul?
Yeah, I over the last year had a bit of a shift in my thinking about climate change, where I think for a long time, because of the media is so focused on the negative impacts and how bad it's going to be, that I essentially got shut down into doing nothing. And then I saw there's a movie called 2040, which very much swapped how I thought about it, because it did something where it's actually looking at how an inspirational vision of how the world might be if we actually do take action. And so I was just wondering how we can, because so much of the media is based on this negative view, how can we switch across to more and inoculate ourselves from that and the inaction that causes, and think more about how to be, how it could be good if we do the right thing, rather than how it will be bad if we do the wrong thing.
This is where I think the importance of storytelling and individual things really matters, because it's those, the documentaries like that. I don't know if the one from Zealandia talked about much of their impact over the last 20 years, but you measure birds that you never used to see in this town are now borderline pests because the damn tui won't shut up and they're everywhere. And that's amazing. In a generation to go from we thought we'd lost them all to God, another one is incredible. And so I think that's where storytelling and individual stuff really matters, and trying to seek those out. And the thing that is maybe sometimes upsetting is they tend to happen on a smaller scale, but they tend to be very localized. And so you do have to look, I think, closer to wherever you currently are, and you're not going to necessarily, until they become massive documentaries, they're going to be the small local stories, but you can see that those things are changing. And I think looking for those, and maybe, exercising some self-care on how much time you follow the burning of the world on Twitter, and taking a break to maybe check out the cute bird rescue stories or anything.
Bird Twitter.
I've got a friend who does research on charismatic animals and why we mostly care about cute ones, and so she's made me get really into mushrooms because fungi are important too. But looking at
I thought I was going in a very different direction.
They're so interesting. But looking at conservation is a good place to start for those stories, I think, because there's a lot of, for every sad endangered species, there's a lot of good rescue and improving stories for there was a Guardian one a while ago talking about how we kind of single-handedly as a planet stopped the CFC emissions back in the early 90s, and I remember learning about this in school and coming home in tears to my father about how his deodorant was destroying the planet because he used an aerosol. I was like, you're gonna kill us all, you have to stop, and he did, and he continues to do that. But that was a massive global effort that we did care enough, and those stories I think can help. So look for those, tell them. I feel like quite a few of you are probably in the creative realm, participate in telling those stories, and channel your energy that way rather than being sad about the science.
Yeah. Wokje, you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I think I do think that there is the media sort of has a tendency to, even just in terms of how they frame, the climate emergency and climate crisis, which is fair enough because it is a crisis, but if people get bombarded with that on a daily basis, maybe there's a tendency to shut down a little bit. But I also think people like Naomi Klein and others are also, I think, have expressed their opinion in that they see a lot of hope and kind of positive change happening, especially from sort of the things like the school strike for climate and the kind of younger generation who are really instead of they actually see that it might be possible to make a change, right? Because they've enabled from Greta sitting outside striking, it has become a global movement, and I think there is a sense in which they feel that it is possible, and they're making changes themselves. They're all kind of deciding not to get driver's licenses or not to or to eat plant-based diets or other things, or not drive a car. So I think, it is a tricky one, because at the same time, like, a lot of climate science will be quite sometimes blunt about what's going on. The IPCC report, I think it was last year, sort of said we have 12 years. We need to really cut our emissions in half to make it, to kind of stick within the acceptable limits of global warming. But that has sparked this global movement. So I think sometimes dire messaging can actually kind of encourage, and in this case it was the younger generation, to really stand up and call on governments around the world to make a difference and to make changes. So I don't really have the answer to the question, but it's around, it is not all dire. I think there is a lot of things happening just in terms of how the conversation is happening, the media is talking about it, policies that are being implemented, from plastic bag charges to zero carbon bills. I think there is a lot happening. It's probably also about kind of bringing those stories together and actually making a positive spin to it, which sounds, I don't know how to phrase it differently, but there is, I think, a lot happening that is positive, and I see this a lot in my classroom, where I see a lot of really passionate students who really, and a lot of them are actually working with 350 or Extinct. Actually, one of my students was on national TV because she was chained to some car or something as part of Extinction Rebellion. So I was, there's a lot of, and it fills me with a lot of hope that is what our students are really passionate about and doing something about. So it is not all dire, but I do get the point that there's a lot of kind of messaging.
Go hang out with teenagers who are active in politics, and you'll just inspirationally filled with hope. The national organizer of the school strike for climate in New Zealand, Sophie Hanford, was just elected to the local council at the Kapiti Coast. So it's one of those, be the change you want to see in the world. Like, let's organize a national movement, and then I'll just casually run for office on the side and win. That's friggin' cool.
She's 18 years old. She was going to be on this panel, but then because of the election and everything, she got
a cool new job.
She's 18 years old and totally kicking ass.
Yeah, she can barely vote, and so there is a lot of cool shit happening, and I think just kind of remembering to look for that is a good way to not get sidelined by how overwhelming it can be.
Yeah. All right, I think we've got, it was John, and then I think Jennifer, and then we have to cut it off at that point.
There's snacks,
but
people.
Yeah, there is a snack. But then we will definitely, you guys can come up and talk to them after, and I think we definitely have one topic for breakout sessions tomorrow. John.
Just a quick one. I feel like I get a lot of my climate information kind of piecemeal. I wondered if there's any trusted resources you have for get your information here, because they're not dicks and they'll tell you these are the things you should probably be doing. Is that a thing?
Do you have a resource you like?
A research about the science of climate change, or
just kind of telling me what to do.
John wants a list.
To young people. Find a very bright.
It's very overwhelming. Just this is the best thing you could be doing right now, or
Well, there's various. I don't know if there's one particular. There is the book that you referred to, How Bad Are Bananas, which I've read a few times. It's a really interesting book, which gives you the carbon footprint of sending a text message to, using paper towels versus an air dry hand dryer. It's all and it also kind of shows how complicated it can be. But it gives you a really good insight into the relative impact of actions. So it also talks about how, it's sort of it's a very good, kind of nice read. But there's all sorts of lists available. If you Google the 10 best things you can do, there's usually kind of a list of things. But a lot of one of the things that is another way to look at it is to calculate your ecological footprint or your carbon footprint and see because it will be different for different people, and depending on what you do, you can look for, because it gives you an overview of what is the biggest which kind of actions have the biggest impact and where you could then make the biggest difference. So I don't know if there's one thing, one source to go for. I would say the book is really interesting, but also maybe, go to a carbon footprint calculator and kind of look for what is, for me, the biggest impact, and also kind of in terms of feasibility, what could I do to change?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Jennifer, you had a question?
Yeah, I know we're pretty much over time. The book Uninhabitable Earth, I don't know if you've read that book at all.
It is on my massive Goodreads list, yes.
It's not so much about the science of climate change as it is about the human impacts as it unfolds. Ultimately, he ends with a message of real hope because of the science related to it. I'm a big believer in personal responsibility, of course, but I think a lot of these things that people are promoting tend to also be red herrings to a degree, because when you look at if we know that air travel is terrible, but we also know that's 2%, and if we all stopped, if the whole world stopped flying right now, we're still fucked. So, I think there's a lot of propaganda right now pointing people in directions where their impact is not as great as it would be if we, for instance, got up the backside of the American military, which we know is huge, or some of these larger political actions that the kids seem to be taking on. To me are things that are much more important to talk about. Do you guys have any experience in directing people towards what is actually most helpful? Because it feels like you get shamed for taking a plastic straw, but actually that's not the thing.
I mean, I think the most helpful thing is to start with is anything that's making a difference.
Right.
That's better than not, which is not the same as action is not inherently better than inaction, but action that makes a difference is better. So if you're debating between doing nothing and getting a reusable straw, awesome, get a reusable straw. If you're debating between, not flying and, protesting the US military, I mean, you could try both, but I think it's
That's good.
I think it's one of those, it depends, and it's kind of about your capacity and life and what can you actually do. Because we need all of those directions. The scale of the problem is such that there isn't one best way. There's a lot of best ways, and we kind of all have to do the ones that we can. And I think and there are a lot of red herrings, and we can get really fixated on each other's straw use and forget about oil. And I think that's being conscious of that is not shaming each other's individual behaviors, but encouraging individual behavior, and then maybe saving all of the shame for the massive systemic and policy-wide things that we're doing wrong, and maybe saving a bit more kind of understanding for individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also, apart from individual actions, there's also a lot of, I think, what is known as civic engagement activities that people can also do in terms of, when you vote in local elections, what is the climate policy of this particular candidate? What do they stand for? Right to because even when I was not a permanent resident, I could still write submissions around policies to the New Zealand government. I'm not sure what happened to them, but this is under national, but I think so it's not just about individual behaviors in terms of the plastic straws or no flying or those sorts of things, but as a citizen, what can we do and kind of demand really action on climate change from the government, and I kind of. Just in terms of how our whole economic system is structured, by buying cheap products that are made in China, we are also in a way, kind of supporting that whole system as well. So choosing different products. I mean, you talked about ethical choices earlier on. There's a whole gamut of things that we could be doing, and I guess it's not about kind of saying, oh, you fly a lot, so therefore that's bad. I think that it's part of a bigger picture, and I think there is also a lot of kind of civic engagement things that we could be doing more of, voting for climate policies and those sorts of things.
I think that's what makes it really hard is that idea that we want. Is there just one thing we can do, or is there a simple direction we can start? And there isn't. We all have to do something, and there's a lot of different somethings. So I think that's what could be really disheartening, but that's also what's kind of encouraging. There's a lot that could possibly help, so we might as well give it a go. Like you can try. But I think, yeah, keeping in mind that the relative impact of things and sort of where should you put your energy, whether that's your energy of encouraging change or like the self-loathing and guilt that you're feeling, and like how can you channel that into the most useful places. And so it's probably not about your straw use, but that doesn't hurt. And how can you put that towards getting your government to do something different, or your city, or some massive corporation that is larger than a government. So yeah, I think just remembering that it's all really complicated, and hopefully we're all trying. I don't think we all are yet, but hopefully we all are.
Yeah, I think encouraging all of like us here in the 7 and 7 community to take the small actions, and then hell yeah, if you know me, you know I'm always on about voting. We're all citizens of somewhere. Most of us, like, we pay taxes somewhere, some of us in multiple places, so we have a voice. And,
For the love of God, vote in your local elections too, not just the national ones. Like, don't just vote for Congress people, fellow Americans.
yes.
Vote for the school boards and the mayors and shit like that. Oh.
Yeah. Sorry, yes, vote. And on that note, we have gone way over, so thank you all so much, and please give a round of applause for